beginning the panel session for the defense of the thesis by Cao Huilin. The thesis is submitted for the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences. The specialization is 230004, Political Problems of International Relations, Global and Regional Development. The topic of the thesis is the Korean Peninsula and the geopolitical strategies of the USA, China, Russia and Japan. Under the order issued by St. Petersburg State University as of October 19th, 2020, our session is held online. Under the order of St. Petersburg State University as of October 19th, 2020, 9327/1, I, Ivan Radikov, Doctor of Political Sciences, acting head of the Department of Russian Politics of St. Petersburg State University, was appointed the chairman of the board. And this order also approved the candidacies of the members of the Dissertation board, and let me introduce them. Maria Lagutina, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of World Politics of St. Petersburg State University. Maria, do you see us and hear us well? Yes, I do. Okay. Zainab Bakhtaridze, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the High School of International Relations, Peter the Great, St. Petersburg Polytechnic University. Zainab, do you hear us and see us? Yes, I do. Okay, thank you. Rebecca Wolfovich, a Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of State and Municipal Administration of the Northwest Institute of Management of the Ranepa Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Rebecca, do you see us and hear us? Do you? Yes, yes, I do. I see and hear you well. Okay. And Alexander Daniilov, Doctor of Sociology, Head of the Department of Sociology, Faculty of Philosophy and Social Sciences of the Belarusian State University. Alexander, do you finally see us and hear us? Yes, I do. I do. Okay, thank you. And our candidate for the degree, Cao Huilin, do you see us and hear us well? Yes, I see you and hear you well. And also we have a connection with the Thesis Supervisor, Madam Galina Gribanova, Doctor of Sociology, acting head of the Department of International Political Processes of St. Petersburg State University. Galina, do you see us and hear us well? Yes? Yes, I do. Everything is okay. Okay. So all the members of the board and the candidate for the degree will hear and see each other. We have a multimedia connection. Dear colleagues, as our session is held remotely in accordance with the order of St. Petersburg State University as of March 23rd, 2020, number 2304/1, I ask all the participants to carefully follow the procedure, and if in case we have a technical failure, or you may stop hearing or seeing each other, kindly inform me about that, and I will announce the technical break in order to eliminate the problems. In case that I have a technical failure, I ask the next in the list, Maria Lagutina, to announce a technical break, and if this situation continues, please be the moderator of our today's session. Do you agree? Yes, sure. So, dear colleagues, do you agree with my proposal? Yes? That's okay. So, dear colleagues who are working, as we're working in the remote mode, in order to improve the quality of our connection, kindly turn off your microphones, but don't forget to turn them on when I give you the floor. And I would also like to inform you that the panel session of the Dissertation board is being recorded and broadcast on the St. Petersburg State University website, and it is also interpreted into English. Or from English into Russian, if someone will speak, will deliver his review in English. Currently, we have an email address posted on the page or with the live broadcast of the board session, and all the listeners can submit their opinion or questions to Ms. Cao Huilin online. The questions regarding the thesis or the scientific discussion. These questions will be forwarded to me by the technical service, and I will read them out during the discussion. Questions, by the way, must be related to the presentation and the content of the thesis, and they should not be anonymous. The person who submits the question should give his or her name and position. And here I would like to also note that the questions that have nothing to do with the scientific discussion or the dissertation will not be considered and voiced. And I would also like to remind you, dear colleagues, that under the order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, approved by local normative acts, the session of the dissertation board is valid, providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. And the total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. The dissertation board consists of 5 people. Everyone is with us today remotely. And we have a multimedia connection with all the members of the board, as well as with our candidate for the degree. And Thesis Supervisor, therefore, we have a quorum, and we have the legitimate basis to continue our session. And I kindly ask the Curator of the Defense, a member of the Department of Dissertation Board Support, Ms. Ekaterina Sazonova, to fill out the attendance list and note all the members of the board present and their work regime, which is a remote one today. And distinguished colleagues, we should discuss the order of our work and our agenda. So, the order is as follows. First of all, first comes the chairman's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. So 5 minutes for that short presentation. Then candidate's presentation providing an overview, so that she will give us a short overview and findings of the research. So that's 15 minutes roughly, no more than that. Then questions to the candidate regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes per question. The candidate's replies to the questions, no more than 5 minutes for all the questions. That's what I offer. Then the reports on the thesis, the board members will be taking the floor in turns to provide their reviews and questions. 10 minutes each speaker. Dear colleagues, no more than 10 minutes per speech. Then comes the chairman's report on the thesis, also 10 minutes. Next come the candidate's comments about the report on the thesis and replies to the questions, 5 minutes, no more than 5 minutes for that. Then the chairman will ask the questions submitted during the broadcast via our website from 2 to 5 minutes. Then a speech by the candidate's thesis supervisor, 3 minutes, shortly. Then, in case we needed, a 5-minute discussion before the open balloting, then open balloting, making a decision on whether to confer the academic degree or not, and the candidate's closing remarks. So these are the time limits. Dear colleagues, any questions or comments on our agenda and on our framework? No objections. Okay. So let us proceed. But before we do that, I kindly ask you to turn off the sound on your mobile phones, but at the same time do not put them away too far so that we could get in touch quickly if there is a technical failure. Thank you very much. So at the start of our work, taking into account that we have such an extraordinary defense and we do not see our candidate for the degree directly, I would like to kindly ask the Thesis Supervisor, Madam Galina Gribanova, a Doctor of Sociology, acting head of the Department of International Political Processes. I would like to ask you to give a short introduction. Please, Galina. Distinguished colleagues, I would like to introduce Cao Huilin, a Chinese subject who graduated from our PhD course at St. Petersburg State University, and she studied for 3 years of the PhD course, and she stayed here during the second semester of this academic year. She defended her qualification work, certification work. She submitted all the documents personally for the defense. But in August, late July, she went to China because her visa was finishing, and also the government of the People's Republic of China tried to return all the PhD students and students from the Russian Federation. The fact that she is unable to come to the defense is clear to everyone. Therefore, I would kindly ask you to take that into account. Thank you. Thank you very much, Galina. Distinguished colleagues, I would also like to inform you about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their compliance with the requirements. So, the thesis by Cao Huilin for the academic degree of the candidate of sciences in specialization 230004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development, is titled The Korean Peninsula and the Geopolitical Strategies of the US, China, Russia, and Japan. Was approved for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg State University, issued October 19, 2020, number 9324/1. Ms. Cao Huilin has prepared her dissertation at St. Petersburg State University, and Madam Gribanova, a Doctor of Sociology, Professor of St. Petersburg State University, is the Thesis Supervisor. The list of 4 published works describe the research findings, and they include 4 papers published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science, and no papers in publications indexed in Web of Science and Scopus. The candidate has submitted the full set of documents to the Academic Secretary. The above-mentioned documents comply with item 12 of Section 3 of the Order on the Procedure of Granting Academic Degrees at St. Petersburg State University. All these documents, as far as I know, correspond with the requirements and are found in the certification file of the candidate for the degree, and the curator of the defense, a member of the Department of Dissertation Board Support, has all the copies. And before I give the floor to the candidate for the degree, dear colleagues, there is a question. Do we need to consider the documents provided? If maybe you have any questions about the documents submitted, is there need to read the entire list? Is there need to consider the entire list of these documents? Judging by the movements of your head, I presume that there's no such need. Okay. Therefore, dear colleagues, we give the floor to our candidate for the degree, Cao Huilin. So please, you have the floor for the short report on research. Please, Cao, you have the floor. Please turn on your microphone. Okay, so we see see the presentation. Dear colleagues, do you see the presentation? Okay, so please. Distinguished chairman, distinguished members of the board, hello. First of all, allow me to express my gratitude to all of you for taking part in this session remotely, especially in such a complicated period. The topic of my dissertation is the Korean Peninsula and the geopolitical strategies of the USA, China, Russia, and Japan. And I'm going to give a presentation of my work. This work is dedicated to the analysis of the games of strategies between the major powers of the Northeast Asia around the Korean Peninsula, and also it is dedicated to the consideration of a plan and specific solutions applicable, acceptable for all parties in order to resolve the nuclear problem of the Korean Peninsula and in order to secure the South and North reunification. The scientific novelty is in the analysis of the Korean problems, considering the paradigm of contemporary geopolitics, and substantiation of the need to consider the situation on the Korean Peninsula from the perspective of interests of the four leading powers, China, the United States, Russia, and Japan, and also the description of the interest of Japan, that is not a direct participant of the political processes on the Korean Peninsula, but still Japan is historically responsible for the problems of the Korean Peninsula, partially, and for the increase of its influence on the establishment of the order in the Northeast Asia. And also we are to provide a sequential analysis of the evolution of the policy of the countries of the major powers, and also we need to discuss the possible solutions and measures needed to resolve the conflict situation on the Korean Peninsula, considering the interests of contemporary states. The object of research is the Korean Peninsula in the geopolitical strategies of US, China, Russia, and Japan. And the subject of research includes the interests and positions of the US, China, Russia, and Japan regarding the North Korea problem and the Korean reunification. The goal of the thesis is to detect the main characteristics of the positions of the four countries on the nuclear problem of North Korea and Korean unification, and to provide reasonable options and solutions acceptable for all the parties. The research objective has defined the following problems that required solutions to, first of all, describe the basic principles and methods of the theoretical methodological analysis of most important notions of geopolitics, and also to describe the history of and development of geopolitics, provide geopolitical characteristic of the Korean Peninsula, identify the essence of foreign political strategies of the four states regarding the Korean Peninsula from the historical point of view based on Russian and Chinese studies. Also to analyze based on the study of the evolution of the North Korea missile problem. We should provide an overview of the potential of the nuclear power of the North Korea. Also, we should analyze the process of the split of the Korean Peninsula and provide possible scenarios of further development of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Then identify internal and external factors that slow down the finding of solution of the North Korean nuclear problem and Korean unification. Compare the approaches of China, the United States, Russia, and Japan to the North Korean nuclear problem and their positions on the Korean reunification, and to elaborate recommendations on peaceful settlement of the North Korean nuclear problem and Korean reunification. The following provisions are brought for the defense. First, Northeast Asia is a region where we see the intersection and collision of the interests of four powers, the US, China, Japan, and Russia. And due to the changes in the world order and relations between the major powers, geopolitical structure of the Southeast Asia, of the Northeast Asia, has changed significantly after the split of the peninsula. Northeast Asia currently is in a state of change. China returns its power center to Northeast Asia, and this will bring further changes, thus causing panic in the United States, and accordingly Northeast Asia faces new problems and challenges. Second point. In the recent years, the nuclear potential of the North Korea has grown significantly and represents not just a regional but rather global threat. The nuclear development in North Korea has changed the situation in the Northeast Asia and also in change the security situation with this region. Therefore, there is a need to swiftly resolve the nuclear problem on the peninsula. Third, the peninsula has faced this split more than half a century ago. The relations between the DPRK and the ROK experienced a period of weakening and a honeymoon during the period of Kim Dae-jung, and a period of serious regression and aggravation and confrontation, and also a period of benign interaction, the period of Moon Jae-in. The DPRK and the ROK are making unsparing efforts to achieve national unification. And fourth, geopolitical advantage of the Korean Peninsula leads to a serious rivalry for the economic, political, and military dominance between the major powers in the region. The problem of Korean reunification and the nuclear problem of the North Korea are internal problems of the peninsula, but are still closely connected with the strategic interests of China, the US, Japan, and Russia. And in order to maintain peace and stability in the Northeast Asia, and in order to secure peaceful settlement of the North Korean problem, there is a need to create and coordinate the activity. China as a major power in Northeast Asia has a long history of ties with the Korean Peninsula and plays an integral role in the resolution of regional issues in the Northeast Asia. The United States are a direct participant of activities on the Korean Peninsula, and Russia also plays a regulating role in other affairs on the Korean Peninsula. Without the unification of such major powers as China and Russia, we cannot ensure the security for the North Korea. And the security need is an integral prerequisite in order to start the process of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. 5. Denuclearization and Korean reunification require the development of a peaceful mechanism on the peninsula that should be promoted and created within the framework of multilateral relations. And this should also ensure the balance of power between the major powers, including China and the United States. 6. The studying of positions and responses of major powers on the problem of the Korean Peninsula in the new geopolitical perspective is needed in order to study the difficulties that the Korean Peninsula faces. And it is also needed to find the solutions to detect the points of where the interests of the major players intersect. And we should define the positions and relation and the attitude of major powers to the problem of the Korean Peninsula. And finally, we should provide efficient, rational, and comprehensive recommendations on joint solution of the Korean Peninsula problem. 7. Recently, with the start of Trump presidency, the attitude and the U.S. strategy in Northeast Asia have faced serious changes, and as a result, we see the new spiral of tension in around the peninsula, mainly due to the fact that the joint declaration of North Korea and the U.S. was not efficiently fulfilled, and the legitimate concerns of North Korea were not taken seriously. The peace on the peninsula faces certain challenges, and the opportunities for American-North Korean dialogue options are lost. Therefore, all the parties should undertake responsibility for timely submission of the resolution draft to the Security Council of the United Nations, aimed to preserve this impetus for political settlement of the nuclear problem, and in order to avoid the situation that may go out of control. The results of such studies can be used as a basis for recommendations used to develop approaches of Russia and China, and the materials can also be used in research work for further studying of the politics of these four countries in Northeast Asia and also in the Asia-Pacific region. They can also be used in university studies in China and in Russia. So I finished my report. Whether I managed to achieve the set goals, you are to judge that. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Distinguished members of the board, any questions to the candidate for the degree? Yes, I have a question. Yes, please, Maria. Thank you very much. In your report, you've mentioned the fact that with the start of Trump's presidency, the position of the U.S. regarding the region that you studied and the problem has changed. But now we find ourselves in such a transition period when Trump is leaving the office. And how do you think with the new presidency, will we see any changes, or is there a need that Biden will continue Trump's policy and will continue to pursue the goals of Trump administration in the region? Thank you very much for the good question. And I'm really interested in this issue. And as far as we believe, the new President Biden, he initiated the dialogue with North Korea, and it is believed that he believes that the North Korean regime so he did not agree that much with the options proposed by Trump. Therefore, when he takes office for North Korea, that will be quite a challenge. Though he said that he did not close the door for this dialogue with North Korea, but we all know that his policy resembles the policy of Obama. Therefore, we'll see, and I'm not sure that the situation on the Korean Peninsula will improve. Thank you. And for us, China, and for the Korean Peninsula, his presidency will be quite a challenge. Thank you. Thank you. Maria, are you satisfied with the answer? Yes? Yes, I am. Thank you. Dear colleagues, anyone else willing to ask a question? Yes, may I? Yes, Professor Wolfowicz, please. Cao Huilin, I wanted to ask your opinion on the following question. Overall, the relations between these four countries that you consider are complicated. How can it influence the North Korean policy? Because that is a complication, the split in opinions, these conflicts that emerge. They create even a more serious tension, geopolitical tension in the region. So what how does it influence the policy of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? Because for them, this poses a certain threat as well. Thank you very much for the interesting question. It seems to me that for North Korea, the most important thing is the relation between the US, China, and Russia, because Japan Japan's policy depends on the US policy. Therefore, today the Chinese opinion and attitude regarding North Korea is very important. And we have good relations right now between our countries, and both Russia and China have always supported and ensured the stability of the Korean Peninsula, and we do support cooperation with North Korea as well. But we'll see what comes next. We believe that this US hegemony has strengthened, therefore their position is very important for the development of affairs in the Korean Peninsula. Thank you. Rebecca Mikhailovna, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you. Dear colleagues, any other questions? None? None of them? Okay, thank you. Dear colleagues, as for external reviews, I got none of them. Therefore, we are now to listen to the reports of the board members, and before we do that, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that all the reviews were already published on the St. Petersburg State University website. Therefore, in your reports, I would ask you to give us just the major results and give the main provisions or questions or comments. Do you agree with that? Yes? Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Okay, and now I would like to give the floor to, I'm not sure whether you know the order in the list. So, Maria, today you are the first to speak. So I give the floor to Professor Lagutina. Thank you very much. Distinguished Chairman, distinguished colleagues, let me deliver my report on the thesis of Cao Huilin on the topic the Korean Peninsula and the geopolitical strategies of the US, China, Russia, and Japan. So, as you let me skip all the formal points, I would like to mention the positive points, and the dissertation certainly is characterized by them. And first of all, I would like to say that it was interesting for me to read the dissertation, which is quite a rare case. That is quite the case when it was interesting to read the thesis, because it contains quite a lot of authors' interpretation and assessments on the topic, and I believe that's quite an advantage of the author of the dissertation and of the scientific supervisor. What was most interesting for me? First of all, the comments on the author regarding the expert assessments of the representatives of the 4 countries regarding the Korean Peninsula. Indeed, you provided such a comparative analysis as of how expert community considers the aspects. Then, I was interested to read the author's scenarios of the hypothetical reunification on pages 62, 64, and on page 96, and also the scenario of denuclearization of the North Korea. Indeed, I believe that's a contribution of our candidate for the degree to the study of this problem. It was interesting to get acquainted with a list of options for reunification. So there is a critical analysis that the author submits. The author is not an optimist or pessimist. The author tried to adequately approach the problem. of a possible Korean reunification, and it seems to me that it's quite an important point, because you don't have a dominating point of view. You describe the objective positions. And the main conclusions of the dissertation do not raise any objections. I fully support them, but certainly I have a list of comments, and allow me to read them out. First of all, in the introduction lacks a detailed description of the relevance of the study. There are no doubts in this, in the relevance of this topic, especially after Trump came to office. This problem became even more acute between the four countries that you've mentioned, and certainly there were certain changes. And you've noted correctly that the configuration of this quadruple changed. And I believe it would be quite interesting to reflect all these positions in the relevance of the study. And traditionally, I have the censure on the wording of the goal of the study. I won't repeat it because the candidates for the degree voiced it. So the wording that you have, you see, you put two goals, and I'm always critical about it, because I believe it hinders the final understanding of the final result. If your goal has two parts, it should be worded specifically, and it should provide for a specific result. And as for the level of development of the topic, first of all, in the introduction, you're limited by just stating the groups of researchers, and I did not find, unfortunately, the overall appraisal of this level of development of the topic, whether the topic is studied well or not sufficiently. And it would be interesting to consider the studies in different countries. What are the points that are most popular among the scientists, especially due to the fact that you have that in the text, and you could have described this section better. Then you do not mention the works of the representatives of our faculty, including Professor Zeleva, and also you did not mention the works of Igor Kefeli, and also you write a lot about economics, and I did not find the reference to the works of Nikolai Mezhevich. He also had a lot of works on geoeconomics. And also the works of American geopolitics are quoted in the works of Russian scientists. I believe that's a drawback, for example, on page 24. In paragraph 1.1, where you provide a short overview of the development of geopolitical thought, there's no characteristic of the new field of geopolitical thought, the critical geopolitics. And in fact, your ideas about the geopolitical evolution are defined by the works that were published in late 20th century, though you always address the contemporary geopolitics in your work. Next point. As a result, I wanted to ask, what do you mean by words geopolitical approach? As far as I know, I always start thinking, what do you mean by this wording? Because the provisions of contemporary geopolitics, the critical one, and the classical geopolitics provisions, they mostly do not coincide, and therefore there is a question, how can you specify that in your work? What are the concepts, what are the authors, what are the approaches that you chose for your work? What were you based upon? The methods of studies are listed, are just listed, and certainly it would be wonderful to see them described in detail, where you applied them. Maybe you could have characterized them as well. Next comment. As I've already mentioned, the advantage of this thesis is in the author's scenarios, but what did I lack? the final appraisal of these scenarios. You do not define which of the scenarios is most probable and why. You just listed them. 6th point, paragraph 2.1. According to its title, it is dedicated to the finding of the reasons of the Korean conflict and the characteristics of the split of the Korean Peninsula. But I tried to find them in the text, the reasons of the split, but I did not find them. And final remark. In your work in chapters 2 and 3, you use the comparative analysis method, certainly to define the common grounds and the differences in the positions of the four countries, though I did not find any mentioning of the, and you should have done it, in the methodological basis of research section. I didn't find the criteria of your comparative analysis. Therefore, this question was also not described. Though it does not, all these comments do not compromise the overall high appraisal of this work, and the majority of such remarks are just technical or just recommendations. And I believe that the thesis by Cao Huilin, titled "The Korean Peninsula and the Geopolitical Strategies of the US, China, Russia and Japan," meets the requirements of the order as of September 2016 on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and I believe that Ms. Huilin deserves the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences in specialization 230004. And Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. Thank you very much. That is it. Thank you very much, Maria. Distinguished colleagues, before we continue, I would like to solicit your advice. We have two options: to listen to all the reports and then give the floor to the candidate, or ask the candidate to answer the questions at once. I believe the second option is better because we can forget questions in the first case. So let's make it this way. We give the floor to our candidate for the degree after each review. So do you agree? Yes, we do. Okay. So please, Cao, you have the floor for the answer. For the answers to the questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the good remarks. First of all, I would like to answer the first and the third remark. And this work lacks the literature of on American, Japanese, and Russian experts' positions, and I certainly agree with it. And I thank you very much for the remark and for providing the surnames of the scientists. Certainly, I will study their works as well. And as for the second remark, we believe that the first goal is the most important one, and based on this goal, we will manage to provide some reasonable options and resolutions acceptable for all countries, and these are the consecutive and inseparable goals. And next comes the fourth remark. I provided American, Italian, schools, and the American scientists studied the option to how to maintain the status of the US in the context of economic globalization. And as for Italian scientists, they believe that there's a need to describe the new world order, not in the economic, they are not based on the economic issues. And as for the Russian field, I've chosen it as the key one. For example, Valentin Dmitrievich Shalin, Ernest Georgievich Koptev. So the Russian school is considers economy as the regionalization of the countries with economic activities in the globalized environment. And I have a geopolitical approach within the framework of this author's understanding, and I analyze the geopolitical position of the Korean Peninsula in the context of foreign political strategies of the US, China and Japan and Russia. And I also defined the phases of the political characteristics and its role in the global politics. And resolving the problems, I also used the methods of historic studies of documents and also comparative analysis, and also the method of hierarchy analysis. From the historic point of view, I analyze the core of this problems of the Korean Peninsula, and also the peculiarities of the change of the geopolitical structure of the Northeast Asia, and also the changes in the geopolitical interests of the Northeast countries in different historic periods of time. And also the studies of documents includes the analysis of provided materials based on the search, and generalization of the works, geopolitical works published by Japanese, Russian, and Western scientists. I systematized, read, and analyzed monographies, reviews on political events. And I also analyzed the periodical publications on the problems of dedicated to the problems of Korean Peninsula in Russian, Chinese, and English. So I generalized all these descriptions of changes in the policies of the four countries regarding the Korean Peninsula. And using the comparative analysis of the positions of the four countries on the nuclear problem of North Korea and Korean unification, we found the intersection points and common grounds between the major powers. We defined their positions and attitudes to the Korean Peninsula problems. I've also found reasonable options and specific resolutions acceptable for all countries. If we talk about the resolution of the nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula, and if we talk about the final reunification, using the hierarchy analysis, I've analyzed the basis of the policies of the four countries regarding the Korean Peninsula, their geostrategic interests, and the changes of positions at the state, regional, and global levels. And then fifth and sixth remark. As for hypothetical options of Korean reunification, in this work, I just defined the most probable option. I did not give a specific appraisal. And in paragraph 2.1, I've just listed the stages of the split and the events that directly resulted in the split of Koreas. Thank you very much for the remarks that helped me to understand the drawbacks of my study, and in my future work I will try to study these issues in detail. And finally, I want to answer the seventh point. In this work, from the point of view of security and economic military levels, I've carried out an analysis. I analyzed the positions of the four countries regarding the Korean nuclear problem, and also the option of Korean reunification. And between their positions, there are certain difficulties and certain common grounds. So based on these common grounds and differences, I gave the challenges and described the prospects to resolve these problems. Thank you. That's it, what I wanted to say. Maria, are you satisfied with the answers? Yes, I am. Okay. Now I give the floor to Professor Danilov, Doctor of Sociology, Head of the Department of Sociology of the Faculty of Philosophy and Social Sciences of the Belarusian State University. Thank you very much. Distinguished Chairman, distinguished colleagues, taking into account the fact that our reviews were already published, there's an option to speed up my review. The first point that I wanted to mention is that I liked the title of the thesis, because here you defined the major players in the region. And another point is that if we talk about the new geopolitics, certainly it was mentioned that the situation has changed and it continues to evolve. Take into account the fact that the thesis was prepared for the new, in the new environment. I wanted to say at once that indeed that is quite an achievement of the author, that the author analyzed a lot of interesting materials. And in the current situation, I believe the candidate for the degree has acted quite modestly when, because I believe that the role of China in the resolution of these problems is significantly growing today. So whoever would start working on the problem, the United States, Russia, whoever, Japan, there were no real results. And I believe that the issue is mostly is to see what will happen inside the North Korea. And the best option, I believe, maybe it's questionable, but I believe that we'll see more and more influence of China in this process. Therefore, this thesis, I believe, brings us to this idea as well. Certainly, we are to resolve 2 points: reunification and nuclear problem, nuclear disarmament. But you see, if we approach this situation in an objective manner, maybe that's just maybe nuclear weapons is just one of the best playing cards for North Korea, because if it didn't have nuclear weapons, we couldn't even imagine what will the country turn into. And the process is a complicated one, and out of the scenarios that the author offered, certainly we do not see the serious prospects for the resolution of the problem, because the entire world today is in the state of global instability. Therefore, to maintain the state, to protect the state, certainly North Korea will not agree to some rapid compromise. And as far as I believe, not a single country out of these 4 is able to offer a real guarantee for North Korea. And we've seen the collapse of the Soviet Union, how it happened. A lot was mentioned, a lot was promised, but in the end, finally it all was reduced to some simple acquisitions, and it did not result in anything described by the partners initially. It did not result in the fulfillment of the hopes that people had. Therefore, certainly I would mention that for the Chinese PhD student, that's quite a good scope of work that you performed, and also the language. The fluent language is also quite impressive, because I believe that the scientific advisor had to exert a lot of efforts for this work to bring it to the conclusion and to see it at the defense in such a good state. I believe that's quite a logical work, and as for the major results and conclusions, they're quite substantiated from the point of view of, you see, I understand that the number of the works considered, it's really incredible, immense. Therefore, it's hard to summarize that all, but still, you've done a lot. And as for the drawbacks, I would also mention that the candidate also prepared 4 publications, because I believe that the PhD defense is also, you know, a kind of bonus for the future. And with the first answer, I believe we've managed to see that the author will continue to work on the issue and will continue to work in the field in science. Therefore, I believe that I'm quite positive about the work, because when we see the defense of people who prepare their work in a different language, it's hard to describe certain significant drawbacks, because I'm always eager to support such people so that the person would continue working in the field. And as for the drawbacks, I have just 2 of them. These are some description drawbacks. So you describe the specific goals, and I believe they should have been described more specifically, and there should be more arguments for them. And the resolution of such global problems in case of global instability does not seem to close, and none of the 4 countries is able to provide the guarantees for peaceful cooperation and prosperity of the Korean Peninsula countries. And also, the second point is that we don't see the real way out of this problem. Problems of the Korean Peninsula in geopolitical strategies of the US, China, Russia, and Japan. On page 160, you mention that in the process of the strengthening of cooperation between the 4 countries, there is a need to understand the goal of the North Korea, talking about its nuclear potential, and we should make it understand that the nuclear weapon won't bring us to some future economic development. So how can we make this country understand, because each of the countries has its own position on the issue, and you do not consider the issue on the development of the plan about the resolution of the problems in North Korea. And also there are some technical faults. And I agree with my colleague that it was interesting to read the thesis. When he mentioned it, I was pleased to read the thesis, because indeed that's not just a logical dissertation. There are certain ideas that could be taken from this thesis, and I believe that the thesis by Cao Huilin corresponds with the requirements of the order as of September the 1st, 2016, and Ms. Huilin deserves the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences and specialization 230004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development. And Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. That is it. Thank you very much. And I would like to say that certainly I understand we all work with foreign PhD students, and it's always rather hard. Therefore, I would like to mention the position of the scientific supervisor. That's really an immense work. So please, thank you very much, Alexander Nikolaevich. So as for your comment that we don't see the real way out of the situation, to the way out of the problems on the Korean Peninsula. So the most urgent is to improve the environment, the security environment for North Korea. There's a need to restore these negotiations between the 6 countries in order to secure the peaceful dialogue in order to recreate the peaceful mechanism in the region. And indeed, there's no specific roadmap and schedule of the implementation of denuclearization on the peninsula and Korean reunification. And in our work, we believe that we could devise certain plan for 5 or 10 years if we talk about joint decisions, and to provide some midterm, short-term and long-term goals. On the Korean Peninsula, we see a lot of uncertainty, and the nuclear problem in North Korea has been developing for over 30 years, and it's unresolved still, and it can get more and more serious. The nuclear potential of the North Korea has grown significantly, and the more we delay the problem, the more complicated it is to resolve it. During the work of the Trump administration, the dialogue between the U.S. and the North Korea had paved the way for the regulation on the issue on the peninsula. There, the U.S. hegemony has strengthened a lot, and the U.S. did not made certain significant steps in the issue, and the coronavirus pandemic had stopped the contacts between the U.S. and the North Korea. And Biden will take office in January next year, and after that it will take from 3 to 6 months before this policy will be voiced, and then we can make certain conclusions. Biden criticized the Trump dialogue with North Korea for legitimization of the North Korean regime. And when Biden will take office, this game of power ways between the U.S. and North Korea will continue, and the results are quite uncertain. And in future, I will monitor the development of this situation. And as for this wording, make the country understand, here I referred to the fact that North Korea believes that having a nuclear weapon, it can provide for its self-defense potential and strength, and secure the guarantees for national security and institutional stability. In order to survive and to develop, the North Korea has increased its pressure on the United States, strengthening its nuclear containment in order to push the countries to compromise. And using this dialogue and negotiations, the countries should remind North Korea that there will be increased tension if this situation continues. And the North Korea is to understand that nuclear weapons will lead just to the strengthening of sanctions and isolation of in the international community, and it won't promote the resolution of the security and economic development problem. That is it. That is my answer. Thank you very much. Alexander, are you satisfied with the answer? Yes. Thank you. Let's believe that someday the words that you mentioned will come true. Now I give the floor to Professor Wolfowicz, the Doctor of Political Sciences from RANEPA, Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration, and the Northwest Institute of Management. So, distinguished Cao Huilin, distinguished colleagues, let me tell you about my report. Certainly I won't repeat the title of the work. And I wanted to mention that certain points that I mentioned as positive ones were not so impressive for my colleagues. For example, I was talking about the fact that you did not define the reasons that brought us to this situation on the Korean Peninsula, the split, this contradiction, interaction, and so on. And for me, the description of a list of chronological events that happened in the second half of the 40s, 50s, and further on, they are quite convincing, and they demonstrated that, in fact, that's quite a classical geopolitical approach. And indeed, I was quite impressed by the analysis of the reasons of the events, and also the analysis of the results of these events. And also I've seen certain exact definitions of the historical reasons, and the author managed to demonstrate that the events were not just the result of some external impact that we understand quite well, that there was this Korean War, that there were the USSR and the US participated in the war. Yet, the North and South Korea had certain differences and tensions, even in an earlier period, that also were the basis for the following events, for the events that followed. And this theoretical substantiation of the understanding of reasons of this conflict and ideological reasons, I would mention that they are quite positive. These are the advantages of the work. And as for the nuclear potential of the North Korea, here I am to agree with my colleague that the need to preserve the state order and also the sovereignty of the state is mostly based on the current situation. So the North Korea was forced to increase its nuclear potential, and in this regard an important role was added by the support of USSR, and we cannot ignore that. And today, considering the growing instability and tension, the resolution of this part of conflict is quite complicated. And as for the forecasts of the candidate, I believe they are quite convincing if you can forecast some resolutions to this conflict. The thing is that the new geopolitics as an analytical field of science is just at the formation, maturity stage, and being based on its analysis is quite complicated, particularly if we talk about the events that happened decades ago. Therefore, I believe that the use of the provisions of the classical geopolitics by the author, regardless of the fact that we, for the second decade, that's the second decade of the 21st century, it's still, I see as a substantiated strategy. And as our Belarus colleague has already mentioned, it's not by chance, from my point of view, that we heard about Germany, though it seemed to me that it's quite a different region and quite a different situation, historical and geopolitical and so on. Yet, I wouldn't like to go into details to find certain drawbacks, to split hairs, to find some points that were missed by the candidate for the degree, maybe due to the fact that indeed this person is not just a person with a different native language, but also Russian language, Slavic languages, something quite alien from something from a different world. Therefore, some points were missed, and I did not concentrate on that. I'm interested in the following facts, and here are my questions that I want to solicit your answers to. Talking about the high level of the research, we would like to raise the following question, the answer to which, from our point of view, is able to strengthen the analysis, including these Korean processes in a wider historical political context. After the Second World War, yes, I beg your pardon, it turned off itself. So, in the center of Europe, we had a split of a national state, and the interests of the Allies in anti-Hitler coalition played an important role, and the two merged states, like two Koreas, had this ideological confrontation, and from this situation maintained for many decades. Yet, when the point of reunification of Germany came in late 80s, early 90s, all the positive ideas, the equality of two systems, the constitution adoption instead of the West German law, they were forgotten, and we've seen just the mere absorption of a weaker economic system, and the political, legal, and economic and social systems were approximated to the standards of the West Germany. So I would like to ask the author to comment on the possible scenarios of reunification in this context. And similar comment is of interest as well if we talk about real or imaginary fears of former enemies of Germany in the war, France and Great Britain, about the possible unified German state, which would be large and strong. So we are talking about powerful, dominating Germany in Europe. And they fear that a lot, both if we talk about France and Great Britain, because they are in the same region in close proximity to the country. So how does this situation look like if we talk about the possible options for the Koreas? We talk about the Korean Peninsula because this new state will have a nuclear potential. It's quite unlikely that in this process you'll manage to organize full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. It's quite unlikely that China will like it, and Japan won't be positive about that as well. And for us, that's a new risk as well, and a more serious one that we have today. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's also interesting for me to have a look at this situation and its development based on the historical experience. The unilateral efforts from any country won't lead to the reunification of the peninsula, and there are internal and external factors that prevent their unification. If we take the German route, first of all, let's consider the internal factors. First of all, there is a huge disbalance between the two Koreas. If we talk about economy, the economy of North Korea was closed, and the survival in the country mostly depends on the humanitarian aid from abroad. And due to this long-term closure and the insistence of society and the insistence on the two-tier ideas, the economy is lagging behind the then East Germany. If all the sanctions are lifted, the North Korea won't be able to quickly modernize its economy and achieve the level of South Korea in the short-term prospect, regardless of the fact that the South Korean economy is relatively developed. It won't be able to afford such an incredible course on this reunification process as Western Germany secured. Huge fiscal compensation will be a hindrance for the economic development of South Korea after the reunification. And the most pessimistic appraisals tells us that reunification will cost South Korea $5 trillion, that actually corresponds with 4 GNPs of the country. During the Cold War, the East and West Germany, though they were controlled by the Soviet Union and the United States accordingly, they were still rather strong economic powers. And East Germany was the most developed country in the Soviet area, and the West Germany was one of the most developed countries of the world. They both had a strong material base, and they resolved the problems that remained after this reunification. Second is that in the political aspect, the South and the North insist on the strict positions in reunification, and not a single country wants to compromise at its expense, and both countries believe that they are the leading powers in the peninsula. And between them, we see a confrontation in different forms, like the threat with power dialogue and consultations, and this creates a lot of problems for reunification. And the governments of the German countries were willing to find some compromise in order to create optimal conditions for this reunification. Thus, German reunification had a positive subjective factor. Third is that there is a nuclear problem on the peninsula. The military power of the two Korean states is strongly different. The North Korean nuclear crisis questions the security of the South Korea. South Korea considers the American Korean Union as a threat to its national security, and it's reliant on the United States in terms of security and defense after the aggravation of situation on the peninsula. Fourth is that we see the formation of different ideologies in two countries. More than 70 years passed since the split, and this gap in identity between the South and the North is quite deep. There are ideological differences between the two parties, and there is also serious distrust between them. German population still associated itself with unified Germany emotionally and in their thoughts, and they expected this reunification. And it should be mentioned that in 1972, the relations between the East and West Germany have improved, and economic and trade exchange strengthened. And as for the relations between the Koreas, the relations did not normalize, and on the peninsula we still did not see the signing of the peaceful agreement. And let's have a look at the external factors as well. During the collapse of the Soviet Union, we've seen the shocks in the Eastern Europe as well. The East European order was fully destroyed, and the control of the Soviet Union over the Eastern European countries had dropped significantly. And at this period of time, the Soviet Union faced a harsh economic downturn, and Gorbachev, in order to obtain some external aid, he compromised in this issue of German reunification. And above all, this German reunification was supported by France, US, and the UK. And North and South Korea, located in Northeast Asia, though being sovereign states, in essence, they are backed by the leading superpowers. And by the end of the collapse of the Soviet Union, though the impact of the Soviet Union dropped on the Korean Peninsula, the US were still strong, and they still continued to preserve their garrison of a certain size in South Korea and in the neighboring Japan. Thus, the South Korea is strongly dependent on the US, both in military and in diplomatic point of view. And South Korea economy is strongly dependent on China. So the three major powers, Russia, US, and China, managed to achieve the power balance on the Korean Peninsula, and the reunification of the peninsula should be achieved with the support of these interested parties. And the neighboring major powers want to unite the Korean Peninsula so that it would be favorable to all the people in the country. And being based on the above-mentioned reasons, today we can say that the South Korea itself has not enough capacity to absorb the North Korea. That's what my answer is. Thank you very much. Rebecca Mikhailovna, are you satisfied? Yes, indeed, and I beg your pardon, I missed the last part. But certainly I believe that this thesis really corresponds with the requirements and regulatory documents, and I believe that Ms. Huilin deserves the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences and specialization 230004. I did not remind you about that. Yes, because I was fascinated by your report. Now I give the floor to Professor Bakhtiridze, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the High School of International Relations. Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Distinguished colleagues, distinguished candidate for the degree, I'll be short and give you the major points. The topic that Ms. Cao chose, that's quite a relevant topic, and it's hard to disagree with the fact that today the geopolitical importance of the Korean Peninsula is quite significant, and we're not talking about just the regional level, but at the global level as well. And first of all, this talks us about some basic points if we talk about the security provision and the problem of the divided communities. And several times we've already mentioned the Germany example. And in this process I had this idea that after the German reunification we had just not economic difficulties but also difficulties connected with such social differences, mental differences, cultural differences, because the communities lived with different ideologies. That's important. And the major points that I would like to draw your attention to as the positive ones, some of the colleagues have already outlined them, so I won't repeat. I like the work. I was very interested to read it. And I would like to particularly mention the following fact. There is such a geopolitical characteristic of the Korean Peninsula, not just from the point of view of the classical geopolitics, but also from the point of view of geoeconomy, geoculture, and so on. Whether it's successful or not, we can have certain discussions, but I believe it's quite successful, and such a claim really should be respected, and that is considered in the context of this rivalry between the four players. Certainly, that's interesting. And as for the reference list, there are papers in 4 languages that the candidate studies. So you analyze the positions of these countries. And what should be mentioned particularly is that you provided both the positions of the heads of the countries and also the positions of experts, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, American experts. That was very interesting to read as well, the different points of view. And talking about further development of the situation, Thesis has not just described the obstacles that are quite clear, but also describes the prospects for the Korean reunification, mentioning that there is the presence of some external positive factors and also providing the options how the countries could act in this direction. Certainly it's obvious that forecasting in such conditions is quite ungrateful, but still such attempts were performed by the candidate. And also the candidate makes the following conclusion, that you cannot but agree that all the 4 countries should have short, mid and long-term prospects considering their own interests and the interests of the Korean Peninsula, and certainly finding such a balance is quite an incredible thing. And you also give the results of the comparative analysis of the positions of the 4 countries on the nuclear problem. And in your conclusions, you substantiate the challenges, the prospects of quite a complicated process of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The colleagues have already mentioned that as well. Well, regardless of this positive opinion, I don't have certain peculiar questions, maybe just a number of comments that may help in the future. So, characterizing contemporary relations of Russia and the Korean Peninsula countries, I believe it would be expedient to consider the latest edition of the foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation as of 2016. And I didn't see it in the list of reference documents. And the concept says Russia is interested in the support of traditional friendly relations with the DPRK and the Republic of Korea, and it will achieve the drop in the confrontation level, easing of tension on the Korean Peninsula, and also it will work to achieve the peaceful development of the Korean cooperation using political dialogue. And Russia supports the non-nuclear status of the Korean Peninsula and will provide any help to secure this denuclearization. And the Russian Federation will continue to exert effort in order to form this mechanism of the support of peace and security in the South-West Korea. And it will also take measures to expand the economic cooperation in the region. Second point. I wouldn't even mention that because it was mentioned a lot, the literature. Geopolitical interests of China in the Korean Peninsula are well described in the work of Henry Kissinger on China, and the author did not use this book for some reason. And third point, American influence on the Korean Peninsula is exerted via the deployment of American missile defense systems in South Korea and in Japan, and Chinese and Russian reaction to the deployment of launchers for American missiles is not presented in the work. I believe this will be an issue for military experts to study, but maybe the author will find these points useful as well. But overall, these comments do not compromise the overall high level and scientific importance and relevance of the work and the arguments, good arguments of the work. And we can conclude that the thesis is quite a finished scientific study. The results are novel and original, and they are substantiated. As for the publications, the thesis was already tested. And I would like to mention that the thesis by Cao Huilin, titled The Korean Peninsula and Geopolitical Strategies of the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan, meets the requirements of the orders of September 1st, 2016, on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And Ms. Huilin deserves the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences in specialization 230004, Political Problems of International Relations, Global and Regional Development, and Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, Ms. Cao, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Zinab Selimhanovna. And as for your first point, in early 90s, Russia stopped its contacts with North Korea at the high political level, and there was this estrangement from North Korea. And starting with 1994, Russia started to concentrate on the restoration of relations with North Korea, and also carried out a policy of equal separation on the Korean Peninsula, though the fact was quite insignificant. And from the point of view, and since Putin came to power, he launched an active international cooperation with the neighboring countries and expanded the influence of Russia on the Korean Peninsula. And in this dissertation, I used the concept of the foreign policy concept of the year 2000 in order to detect the new Russian position on the peninsula and to track the change in policy of the Russian Federation on the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, I did not mention this foreign policy concept of 2016, but indeed it's also quite important for this thesis. Thank you very much for mentioning it. As for the second point, geopolitical interests of China on the Korean Peninsula, in this work we used Russian and Chinese materials mostly. Therefore, the work by Henry Kissinger was not mentioned, and that's a drawback of my dissertation. In my future work, I will study these materials more. And as for the third point, strengthening the security system between the US, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, and the deployment of anti-ballistic missile defense units of the United States change the balance of safety and really violate the strategic balance. And in this work, we did not consider the reactions of Russia and China as important objects of research. Therefore, I did not describe that specifically. And in my future work, I will emphasize this topic as well. Thank you very much. Zainab, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you very much for that. Distinguished colleagues, let me voice my opinion on the thesis. As my colleagues have already defined many points, and I certainly agree with the majority of them. Certainly, I won't read the entire text as you did. First of all, what seemed most important for me, that should be, I start with most universal points and then shift to my subjective opinions that could improve the quality of work. The first thing that I wanted to mention is the relevance of the topic that the candidate for the degree has chosen. A lot was already mentioned about that, but I want to emphasize this exact definition of the title. Sometimes we take terms from other disciplines, misunderstanding the essence. And here, if we talk about this quadrangle as a genetic figure that has 4 points and 3 are never lying on one line, and from this, and out of these 4 countries, they have no compromise in their positions as well. And this formula is also quite successful because these 4 tops, there are 4 lines that unite these tops, and even in this definition, you formulated this methodological basis that the author is based upon. The second point to be mentioned is that you have it in the introduction that considering this geographical points of the Korean Peninsula, the most important concept provision that was observed by the experts in the recent years is that the Korean problem is not of some secondary importance. It is of particular importance not just for the Asian policy, but also for the global one. And here we find, we also emphasize the importance of this work. The third provision that I wanted to mention, unfortunately we did not mention it today. Taking into account, if we talk about this thesis, we should talk about novelty of work. And if we analyze the content of this research, certainly the characteristic of the situation on the Korean Peninsula through the perspective of geopolitical interests of these 4 major powers, principal powers, the results of comparative analysis of the strategies of these states on most important issues that the authors consider, their unification, denuclearization, and so on, and also the author's proposal of the roots, of the solutions to the problem. Certainly, it has a certain scientific novelty, and here I would add, although the author does not write about it, I would note these new sources to the scientific, to our field of science. For example, the studies of Chinese experts on the Korean Peninsula, certainly that's novel as well. Next point that I want to mention as a positive point, I like this research logic of the author. The author carries out an analysis of the detection of possible ways to unite the Korean Peninsula, and the basis here is that the detection of the that first of all we should detect the reasons of this split and the consequences of it, and take into account the obstacles that slow down the process. I believe that's very important to consider that all, because understanding the reasons and the consequences, and I'd like to dwell upon that as well. So taking that all into account, we can eliminate that, and this may bring us to the point of reunification. But I believe that the reasons of this split were considered quite in a general way. And one of the results of the military and ideological confrontation of former allies, here I'm referring to the United States and to USSR, but if we continue to follow this logic, this declared end of the Cold War, lack of ideological confrontation should bring us to an end of the split between the Koreas, and it means that we should consider other historical reality points as well, the consequences of the split that had happened, that had already strengthened. And we see the psychological, mental differences, as it was already mentioned today. We should take that all into account, and there's yet another point that we should have analyzed in detail. And maybe I missed it, or maybe the work like said. When you talk about the obstacles that the Korean reunification faces, you know, I would like to see the analysis of this collective memory, collective historical memory on the existence of these two states, Korea and Korea, because that's a fact, but you do not mention it. These borders of these two states coincided with the current borders of the North and South Korea. And I would like to mention that this reunification happened in 1895 under the influence of Japan. So United Korea existed only within the framework of the German Empire. Therefore, the unification, and here you imply a priori that that's a natural process, it is not a full alternative. Maybe there are other options as well. I believe that's important, and the author herself writes that if we analyze the attitudes of citizens, especially youngsters, the majority demonstrates a trend that the unification is not an alternative, and they do not need it, especially if we talk about North Korea and South Korea as well. I believe that's mentioned quite fairly, and I believe this idea should have been developed as well. That's about the positive points, and certainly the conclusion that Cao Huilin makes, that resolving this long-term conflict is possible only with dialogue, and certainly I believe that there are no other options for that. And now a few words about the drawbacks, or rather not drawbacks, but my remarks. I won't call them drawbacks. First, it was already mentioned by Maria, the level of development of the topic. We can say that the author studied a lot of works, yet studying the strategies of the United States, of China, of Russia and Japan. So the author here is mostly working with the Russian and with Chinese sources. So how can it happen that we study the US and Japanese strategies, but we don't study the documents? I believe this is a problem. I could call this these problems, but as the author has already mentioned, the prospects of further studies, I believe the author will find these works herself. And I believe this will improve her vision of the issue. And second point is something that I'd like to dwell upon in detail. I believe that's quite a typical problem. Lack of thesis works among the reference list. If we defend the thesis in St. Petersburg State University, I believe that you should have taken into account that in Russia there were a lot of theses published that considered different options of the Korean issue. And in our university, there were such dissertations as well. Maria, I believe you will support my point of view. And there are no references to them. And how can we talk about our own contribution in scientific novelty if we do not compare our achievements with the achievements of our colleagues? I believe that's a drawback here. Third point. Considering the hypothetical or reunification options, the author mentions the option of peaceful coexistence of the two Koreas as a possible option, and even makes a conclusion of the fact that this option is most acceptable in this period of time. But this idea was not described in full. It was just mentioned, and I believe you should have written more about that, because I believe that this option is something that we're going to see for a long period of time. And fourth point is that when initially you mentioned the importance for the global policy of, and when you focused on the importance of this peninsula from the geocultural and geoeconomic point of view, it seemed to me that today's reality, require the analysis of military importance of this peninsula. If we talk about access to seas, the proximity of important marine routes and passages, because there are trade lines going there as well. And nearby there is a Camp Humphreys base, and you do not just mention it, but that's one of the sources of problems here that won't give an option to unite the states right now. And still, I want to say that these remarks are rather offers to the candidate for the degree, and certainly they are mostly explained by the relevance of the topic, by the novelty of the subject, and certainly they do not compromise the overall positive appraisal and positive impression that I had when I got acquainted with the work. And the scientific results were given in publications, were discussed on the department sessions as well, so all the formal checks were carried out. And the conclusion is that the dissertation of Cao Huilin, titled "The Korean Peninsula in the Geopolitical Strategies of the US, China, Russia and Japan," meets the requirements of the orders of September 1st, 2016 on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And Ms. Huilin deserves the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences and specialization 230004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development. And the Article 11 of the above-mentioned order is not violated. And dear colleagues, during our session, I wanted to say that we did not get questions to the candidate for the degree. And now I would like to give the floor to Ivan. Huilin did not answer your questions. Oh, I beg your pardon. I was just so fascinated. I beg your pardon for that. Certainly. Yes, maybe I was a bit too nervous. Thank you very much. Professor Radikov, I want to answer. As for the drawback, as for lack of American and Japanese sources, indeed, if these documents are accessible in English, and if these documents would be accessible in English or in Japanese, certainly the work would be more convincing, but due to language limitations and time limitations, I've chosen mostly the documents in Russian and in Chinese, and in my future work I'll pay attention to the documents of the countries, and I will have a more comprehensive analysis. And as for the sources used, before choosing the topic of the study, and before it was approved, I studied Russian and Chinese dissertations, and also periodic publications, reports, but unfortunately I did not carry out a detailed analysis and did not add it up to the description of a development level of the problem. But overall, I would like to thank you for these valuable comments, and I will continue to study this issue in the historical and military political aspects. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dear colleagues, once again, I beg your pardon for speeding up a bit. And I want to say once again that we did not get the questions, external questions during our broadcast. Therefore, we continue working, and we give the floor to scientific advisor, Professor Grabanova. Thank you very much. I believe that the level of discussion that we've seen on the dissertation demonstrates that the topic is quite relevant. One, the thesis is interesting, and I would like to sincerely support my student. Indeed, she is a very responsible lady, and in some parameters, she is an ideal PhD student. Everything is done on time. Everything is done with the understanding of the problem, and she has a very responsible approach if we talk about the quality of her work. And this was demonstrated in the works that she wrote and in her teaching practice as well. Certainly it was hard to work because the topic is quite a complicated one, and also, but it's interesting, and also the fact that we had to work in the Russian language, and you understand that there is this language barrier as well. Yet, as far as I believe, Huilin has demonstrated all her best, and let's not forget the fact that the PhD thesis is just a step. It's just the first step to a serious research work, and I really hope that the student will continue this work. And at the level of the university, I hope that we will continue our cooperation, because the Korean topic, Russian-Chinese relations topic is as relevant as it's never been. So I ask you to support the work of my student. The distinguished colleagues, due to the fact that we are working in an online mode, I have to ask you the following question. Maybe you have any questions or any unclear points that we did not discuss. Maybe anyone wants to mention that? No. Okay. There's yet another point, dear colleagues, that I want to discuss. According to the rules, we can organize a close discussion before the start of open balloting, but we can ignore this close discussion and shift to our open balloting at once. So I have an offer to start this balloting at once, because it's quite obvious from our discussions that we don't need this secret balloting. So let's discuss everything at once, if you don't mind, dear colleagues. Okay, you do not. So we won't declare a technical break for the discussion, and we will continue our session at once. Okay, so I raised the question on the award of the degree of the candidate of political sciences to Ms. Huilin in specialization 230004, political problems in international relations, global and regional development. Yes, I beg your pardon, I thought that these are our colleagues. So I raised the question of awarding the degree of academic degree of the candidate of political sciences and specialization 230004. And I bring this issue to open balloting, and I would like to remind you that the decision of the thesis board is valid, providing more than half of the members voted for it, so we should have 3 positive opinions out of 5. That's Article 23 of the order. So let's start our vote. Madam Lagutina, what's your opinion? Distinguished colleagues, I support this dissertation and I vote for the awarding of the degree of the candidate of political sciences to Cao Huilin. Thank you very much. Zena Bakhtaridze, please, your opinion. Yes, I also support the work and vote for. That's how you did a wonderful work. Professor Wolfowicz, yes, I support as well. Professor Danilov, what's your opinion on the point? Yes, I support the work as well. And I, Chairman, also support this work. Thus, distinguished colleagues and guests, I would like to announce that out of the 5 members of the board, 5 people voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained from the vote. And the decision on the awarding of the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences to Cao Huilin in specialization 230004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development, is made. So, distinguished colleagues, due to the fact that our session was organized remotely, yes, I need to repeat that. As it was organized remotely, I want to ask if the candidate for the or members of the board had any comments on the procedure of our work. I see none. Okay. So the concluding remarks. Ms. Cao, please, you have the floor. Distinguished Chairman and distinguished members of the board, let me express my gratitude to those who participated in the preparation of the defense of my thesis. First of all, I would like to thank the chairman of the board and the academic secretary for the opportunity to organize the defense. Second, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to my scientific supervisor, Galina Gribanova, for her help at all stages of work on my thesis and my academic studies and so on, because I started working in political science from scratch. And the choice of the topic was just was secured by your help. Thank you very much for supporting me. And third, I would like to thank the opponents for their reviews that helped me to understand the drawbacks of the work and to understand the importance of the work. And also, I would like to thank you for the overall positive assessment of our thesis. And I would like to thank you once again and congratulate you all with the holidays that are upcoming. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I believe that that is the time when we can congratulate our student, and I believe that it's great that at St. Petersburg State University we held such a defense, and we unanimously award the academic degree of the candidate of political sciences in specialization 230004. For us, for political science of Russia, for St. Petersburg State University, I believe that is an extraordinary event because we see such a promising, such a thinking scientist, young scientist, that at the very beginning declared that she won't lose this connection and will continue to develop them. And certainly I believe this will promote the development of the political science and general understanding of the processes. Once again, I would like to congratulate you with this important event in your life. We wish you not to stop here and to continue to develop your thoughts, and I want you to take into account those wishes that you've heard. I would like to congratulate all the colleagues with the forthcoming new year. That was quite a hard year, but we managed to weather this crisis. Therefore, I believe that in 2021 we'll manage to overcome all the differences and we'll see each other personally, and will develop the political science, and will overall teach our students to defend their thesis like that, as Ms. Cao did. So I wish you good health. I wish you everything best in the new year. So any members of the board can add up to my words, if you please. Dear colleagues, I thank you all for participation. I hope that indeed we'll manage to see each other in person. And indeed, I'm really grateful for the high appraisal of our work with Huilin, and that is, I believe, a small brick in to the building of our future cooperation. Because actually, when there are defenses of PG students from other countries, will continue to support our connections and strengthen international cooperation like that. And we'll see the growth of this cooperation with China, so please take care. Anyone else? So, dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate you all with the forthcoming New Year and Christmas. And, you know, it's important so that everyone would feel well this year, and in this case everything will pass without consequences. And certainly please stick to the recommendations of our doctors. Certainly sometimes we ignore them, thinking that this won't have any impact on us whatsoever. So take care. Congratulations on the forthcoming holidays. Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like to thank your university and all the Belarus nation. So, dear colleagues, yes, I would also like to congratulate Cao Huilin with this important stage, and I would like to wish you that so that your further steps will be as successful and as important as that. And I would like to congratulate Madam Grabanova with such a defense. Dear colleagues, I was glad to see all of you, and best wishes to you. Thank you very much. Zainab? Yes, I would also like to congratulate our student, and I'm glad that we have this trend that students are coming from other countries and they organize defenses in the Russian language. And certainly I would like to congratulate the scientific supervisor, because we know that that's a lot of work from the scientific supervisor and a lot of time spent on the thesis preparation. So, dear colleagues, once again I would like to congratulate you all with the forthcoming new year. Let it be more merry, live, open, not online but offline. So that's what I want to wish. Thank you all. So, Rebecca Mikhailovna, yes, as everyone congratulated, I also want to congratulate everyone, and I would like to wish all the best to everyone. And as for our candidate, I would like to wish her resilience and responsibility, because these are her characteristics, as the academic supervisor mentioned. And I would like to wish you to pursue her goals in the future. And you need to define these goals, certainly. So I wish you all the best in that. Thank you. So, distinguished colleagues, I believe that it's time to say the final words, the most complicated words of the session. We declare the session closed. Thank you, everyone, for participation, and I believe it was quite a good one and quite a merry one. So, we congratulate you on this achievement, Ms. Cao. So, turn off the broadcast, please. So, good luck to everyone.